The ground is shaking, not from an earthquake, from something worse. 68 tons of Soviet engineering ambition crawling toward you at 60 kilometers per hour. A gun so large it could punch through a reinforced bunker. Armor that laughs at everything your army brought to the fight. This is the IS-7. Joseph Stalin VII. And here's the paradox that will haunt you for the rest of this video. The most powerful tank of its era never fired a single shot in real combat. How did Soviet engineers build a machine 20 years ahead of its time? And why did that genius destroy it? Stay with me. To understand the IS-7, you have to feel the fear that World War II left behind. Soviet tankers knew what it meant to stare down a tiger or a panther and wonder if your shell would even penetrate. They watched their comrades burn inside machines that were supposed to protect them. And when the war ended in victory, Soviet High Command made one collective decision. Never again. Never again would the enemy hold a technical edge. Then intelligence reports started arriving. Britain was developing the Conqueror, a heavy tank with a 120mm gun. Americans were working on the M103, same caliber, same purpose, to stop Soviet armor cold. NATO wasn't a paper alliance anymore. It was a real military force preparing for a real confrontation. The old IS-2 and IS-3, legends of the victory parade, were suddenly not enough. The IS-3 had genuinely terrified Allied observers in Berlin in 1945. But engineers already knew its weaknesses. Unreliable drivetrain, cramped turret, a gun that might become obsolete tomorrow. The Soviet Union didn't need a new tank. It needed an absolute answer. Some people build machines, others forge their ambitions, their fears, and their answer to the world into metal. Joseph Kotin belonged to the second category, chief designer at the Leningrad Kirov plant. The man who already gave the Soviet Union the KV-1 and the heavy IS series, machines that changed the course of the war. But after 1945, Kotin wasn't resting. He wanted to build something that crossed every known boundary. Something after which people would say, this is where engineering ends and art begins. Work on the IS-7 started in 1945. The ink on Japan's surrender barely dry, and design bureaus were already burning midnight oil. The first prototype appeared in 1946. But it wasn't yet the beast we know. Early trials were brutal. The suspension couldn't handle the machine's own weight. Tracks snapped, the engine overheated. One early prototype simply broke down in the middle of the test range, before anyone had even fired the gun. Imagine the look on an engineer's face watching his creation sit frozen in the snow, defeated not by an enemy, but by its own complexity. Kotin didn't stop. He rebuilt the suspension, redesigned the layout, hunted for better materials. The team worked under constant pressure. Stalin personally inquired about progress. And when Stalin asks questions, that's not interest, that's a threat. By 1948, the machine had reached its final form, and it wasn't a tank anymore, it was a manifesto. Let's talk about what made the IS-7 genuinely extraordinary. And I'm not exaggerating, some solutions built into this machine wouldn't appear in other countries' production tanks for 20 or 30 years. 130mm. Remember that number. The legendary Tiger II had 88mm. The American Pershing, 90. The early British Centurion, 83. The IS-7 outclassed all of them with caliber alone. But caliber isn't everything. The S-70 gun pushed shells downrange at over 900 meters per second. At 1 kilometer, it could punch through roughly 250 millimeters of homogeneous armor. No production tank of that era came close. None. Now here's where it gets genuinely wild. Loading a shell this heavy manually is exhausting. Each round weighs 33 kilograms. 5 shots in, under fire, in a cramped turret, it becomes nearly impossible. Kotin's team knew this, so they installed an automatic loader. 1948. Automatic loading in a Soviet heavy tank, 4 decades before it became standard in the T-64 and T-72. Theoretical rate of fire, 6 to 8 rounds per minute. For a 130mm gun, that's science fiction. Now the armor, hull front, 150mm of steel, but not a flat plate, rational slope angles, brought the effective equivalent protection to over 300 millimeters. For comparison, a standard reinforced concrete bunker wall is 200 to 250 millimeters. The IS-7 was harder to crack than a bunker. The turret was cast in a single piece, no weld seams in critical zones, with frontal thickness reaching 240 to 250 millimeters, and those characteristic rounded surfaces that deflected shells rather than absorbing them flat. The IS-7's turret became an ancestor of shapes you see in modern tanks today. Here's the biggest surprise: a 68-ton machine, 1,050 horsepower under the hood, power-to-weight ratio of roughly 15 horsepower per ton. The Tiger II managed less than 10 and moved like a wounded mammoth. The IS-7 hit 60 kilometers per hour on a road. 60, that's roughly the speed of a city bus. Except this bus weighs as much as 16 elephants. Torsion bar suspension with hydraulic dampers gave the crew a ride quality other tank crews could only dream about. Hydraulic power steering meant you could turn this 68-ton monster with one finger. And then there's the detail that sounds impossible: a remote-controlled anti-aircraft machine gun. Shoot at aircraft without opening the hatch. 1948, remote weapon control. The Americans wouldn't standardize that until the M1A2 Abrams, 45 years later. 1949, the IS-7 passes state trials. Every specification met, some exceeded. The military is thrilled. The designers are exhausted but proud. The road to mass production looks open. Stalin said no. The reasons came one after another, each one a nail in the coffin. First, weight. 68 tons was a death sentence for Soviet infrastructure. Most bridges in the USSR and Eastern Europe couldn't take it. Rail transport required special flat cars and restricted routes. Imagine the logistics of an armored offensive when your most powerful tank can't cross every second bridge. Second, cost. One IS-7 cost as much as 10 T-54s. 10. For the price of one monster, you got an entire tank platoon of capable machines. Soviet military doctrine always valued mass as a force multiplier. Third, a Council of Ministers decree in 1949 banned production of any tank exceeding 50 tons. The stated reason: heavy tanks were no longer practical in modern warfare. The real subtext: the nuclear age changes everything. Why spend a fortune on a complex monster when an atomic bomb erases entire armies in seconds? 6 IS-7 prototypes were built, 6 machines that could have fathered an entire dynasty. Most were scrapped, cut apart for metal, or left to rust in forgotten corners of test ranges. 2 survive today. One stands at the Kubinka Tank Museum outside Moscow, silent, motionless, like a mammoth preserved in ice. A witness to what could have been. Kotin outlived his greatest creation. He kept designing the PT-76, the T-10, others. But the IS-7 remained his unfinished dream, the machine he made too perfect for its time. Let's see how the IS-7 stacked up against its potential enemies. Britain's Conqueror, adopted in 1955, 120mm gun, 65 tons, top speed 35 km per hour, 178mm of frontal armor. The IS-7 is slightly heavier but nearly twice as fast, with a more powerful gun and better protection. The Conqueror got built and served. The IS-7 got banned and scrapped. The American M103, adopted in 1957, 120mm gun, 58 tons, around 37 km per hour, 178mm of frontal armor. Again, the IS-7 wins on nearly every parameter. Again, the American tank served. The Soviet masterpiece rotted. And here's the most interesting comparison of all. A modern main battle tank, like the T-90, weighs around 46 to 50 tons and carries a 125mm gun. The IS-7's 130mm cannon, firing unguided shells, is comparable in raw penetration to some modern systems. The concepts Kotin laid down in 1948 never truly became obsolete. Some historians half-jokingly suggest if the IS-7 had entered mass production, Soviet tank design might have taken a completely different path. The heavy tank dead end of the 1960s might never have happened. But that's alternative history. So what is the IS-7's legacy? A machine that never heard a combat shot fired in anger. A masterpiece buried by the man whose name it carried. Engineering genius that arrived too early and paid for it. But the IS-7's inheritance isn't measured in battle honors, it's measured in ideas. Autoloading became standard in Soviet and Russian tanks. Rational turret armor angles flowed into the T-54, T-62, and beyond. Hydraulic power steering found its way into the next generation. Remote weapon control showed up decades later in modern systems. Kotin didn't lose, he just played a game whose results other people lived to see. The IS-7 is a reminder that in the history of technology, the best doesn't always win. What wins is what arrives on time, what costs less, what fits the system. Genius without compromise ends up in a museum. But that's exactly why we remember it 75 years later. Not the T-54, which they built by the million. The IS-7, which they built 6 of. And now the question I want you to answer in the comments, was Stalin right to kill the IS-7? Is a massively powerful heavy tank a genuine battlefield winner or an expensive toy that solves nothing in modern war? And if the IS-7 had gone into production, would it have shifted the balance of the Cold War? Write below. I'll read the best answers in the next video. If you enjoyed this, a like helps the channel more than you think. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.